Good morning and welcome to the Clovis Brief. I'm your host and today is Monday, June 8, 2026. Let's start with the weather here in northern Illinois. Right now we're dealing with heavy rain. It's 66 degrees, feeling like 69 with winds around 7.5 miles per hour. Not the most pleasant start to the week. We'll see a high today of 82 and a low of 64 with more than half an inch of rain expected. Looking ahead, Tuesday brings lighter rain with similar temperatures. Then Wednesday we're looking at thunderstorms as we push into the upper 80s. But watch out for Thursday. Heavy showers are forecast with over 3 inches of precipitation possible before we cool down to the low 70s by Friday. Now let me preview what's coming up today. We've got major breaking news as Israel and Iran have exchanged missile strikes, threatening the fragile Middle East ceasefire. We'll also cover a devastating earthquake in the Philippines. Closer to home, we'll talk about Chicago's push for a no-crime weekend campaign after recent violence. In our tech segment, we're diving into a major debate about data breaches and disclosure lag, some fascinating AI research including whether large language models can properly understand probability, and a vulnerability in DDWRT routers that's spreading a new botnet. Security-wise, CISA has added several critical vulnerabilities to their known exploited list, including issues in SolarWinds and Palo Alto networks. And we'll discuss a new hepatitis B treatment that scientists are calling a functional cure. We begin with breaking news from the Middle East that's dominating headlines this morning. The Associated Press reports that Israel and Iran traded strikes overnight, threatening to drag the region back into full-scale war. This comes as a major blow to the fragile ceasefire that had been holding. According to NBC News, Israel struck Iranian military targets just hours after Tehran launched its own attacks. The BBC adds that Iran released footage of missiles being launched at Israel. President Trump, speaking to NBC's Meet the Press, called on both Israel and Iran to immediately stop attacks. Trump also stated that the U.S. will work with Iran to destroy its uranium stockpile if they can reach a deal, and he dismissed the idea that this conflict betrays his No New Wars campaign message, according to both NBC News and AP News. Moving to another major international story, the Associated Press is reporting that a 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck the southern Philippines, killing at least 19 people, felling buildings, and setting off a tsunami. The BBC confirms at least 19 dead after this major quake. This is a developing situation, and emergency response teams are working in the affected areas. NPR's coverage notes the significant tsunami risk for some coastal areas following this powerful quake. In European news, the BBC reports that Armenia's pro-Western government has won their election despite significant Russian pressure. This represents a notable geopolitical shift in the Caucasus region. Meanwhile, according to the BBC, close European allies of Ukrainian President Zelensky have set out 5 specific conditions for peace talks with Russia. PBS NewsHour adds that European leaders are stressing the urgent need to bolster Ukraine's defenses against Russian ballistic missiles. On the domestic political front, NPR Politics reports that the red state-blue state divide is real, but it's driven by more than just politics. Their analysis shows deeper cultural and economic factors at play. NPR also covered Trump walking out of an interview after being pressed on election fraud claims, while ABC News has a story on Vice President Harris eyeing a possible 2028 comeback, though some former allies are looking to fresh faces instead. The Hill reports that divisions are mounting between GOP lawmakers and Trump, raising tensions within the party. They also note that Republicans are plotting a third reconciliation bill as the midterm clock ticks, while Congress scrambles on Reconciliation 2.0 and FISA reauthorization. Meanwhile, Politico has analysis on the young women who could make or break MAGA in upcoming elections. In international politics, the Associated Press reports that China's President Xi was given a lavish welcome in North Korea ahead of closely watched talks with Kim Jong-un. This high-profile visit signals continued strengthening of ties between Beijing and Pyongyang. Wrapping up with a business headline from Bloomberg, they're reporting that copper rebounded from Friday's slump even as Gulf tensions flare, with Chinese buying and U.S. flows supporting the market. However, European stocks dropped on the Middle East escalation, and gold extended its losses as the Israel-Iran clashes endanger the broader Mideast truce. Bloomberg notes that U.S. stocks halted their sell-off, with rising oil prices lifting yields. Now let's turn to local news here in Chicago and across Illinois. WGN News Chicago is reporting a tragic loss for Chicago sports fans. Stacey King, the longtime Bulls broadcaster who won 3 NBA titles with the team in the 1990s, has died at age 59, according to an announcement from the team. King was beloved not just for his playing career alongside Michael Jordan, but for his enthusiastic and entertaining broadcasting style that made Bulls games more enjoyable for generations of fans. WGN also reports that recent violence in Chicago has sparked a push for a no-crime weekend campaign. This comes after what WGN describes as a violent weekend across the city. The grassroots initiative aims to mobilize communities and raise awareness about violence prevention. Community organizers are hoping to create momentum for a weekend where the city sees zero violent incidents, an ambitious goal that reflects the frustration many residents feel about ongoing violence. On a more positive note, WGN covered the Bank of America Chicago 13.1 race, which showcased the city's west side. The half-marathon route brought thousands of runners through neighborhoods that don't always get the spotlight, highlighting community development and the vibrant areas of Chicago's west side. Weather-wise for our local forecast, WGN is calling for a wet start to the week ahead of 90-degree heat later on. That tracks with what we discussed earlier. We're dealing with heavy rain today before things heat up midweek. In other local news, WGN reports that a man killed after a fatal I-290 explosion in the western suburbs has been identified. The incident occurred on the interstate, and authorities are still investigating the cause of the explosion. Additionally, Lombard police are investigating an overnight homicide, according to village officials who spoke to WGN on Sunday. Details remain limited as the investigation is ongoing. Let's dive into our tech and AI segment, starting with some significant conversations happening in the developer community. Over on Hacker News, Troy Hunt's latest analysis is getting serious attention. 1,500 points and 57 comments for his piece titled 1,000 Data Breaches Later, the disclosure lag is worse than ever. Troy, who runs the Have I Been Pwned service, has tracked 1,000 major breaches and found that companies are taking longer than ever to disclose when customer data has been compromised. This is a critical issue because the longer the delay, the more time bad actors have to exploit stolen data before victims can take protective action. Hacker News is also buzzing about a post called Dopamine Fracking, which scored 330 points and 152 comments. The piece examines how modern apps and services are engineered to extract maximum engagement by hijacking our dopamine systems, essentially drilling deep into our psychological reward mechanisms to keep us hooked. On the AI front, Microsoft is making waves with news that OneDrive data now has an expiry date, according to a story on MS365 News that got 50 points and 42 comments on Hacker News. This represents a significant shift in cloud storage philosophy, with implications for long-term data retention and backup strategies. There's also discussion around whether AgentsMD files actually help coding agents. This got 37 points and 25 comments on Hacker News, with developers debating whether standardized documentation files for AI agents improve their ability to understand and work with code bases, or if it's just another layer of metadata that doesn't meaningfully help. The big AI news from Hacker News today is that DeepSeek V4 Pro beats GPT 5.5 Pro on precision, garnering 277 points and 125 comments. This Chinese AI model's performance is noteworthy, especially on precision tasks where accuracy matters more than broad knowledge. It's another sign that the global AI race isn't just about American companies anymore. Now let me turn to the research side. We've got some fascinating papers from Archive today. First up is a study titled How Reliable Are LLMs When It Comes to Playing Dice? With ID 2606.07515. Researchers investigated the probabilistic reasoning capabilities of large language models through controlled benchmarking on discrete probability problems. Essentially, they wanted to know, can these models actually understand random chance and probability the way humans do? The findings suggest that LLMs struggle with true probabilistic reasoning, often confusing frequency with probability and failing to properly model random events. This has implications for using LLMs in any application requiring statistical analysis or risk assessment. Another intriguing paper is MemDreamer, decoupling perception and reasoning for long video understanding via hierarchical graph memory and agentic retrieval mechanism. Archive 2606.07512. Current vision language models struggle with hours-long videos because processing full-length visual sequences causes what researchers call prohibitive token explosion. MemDreamer proposes a hierarchical memory system that separates what the model perceives from how it reasons about that information, allowing it to handle much longer videos without running into computational limits. There's also work on continual learning in large language models with sparse subspace-to-expert sharing for task-agnostic continual learning. Archive 2606.07500. The paper addresses the plasticity-stability dilemma. How do you teach an LLM new things without it forgetting what it already knows? The proposed solution uses sparse connections between different expert modules, allowing the model to acquire new capabilities while preserving existing ones. On the developer tools front, LobStarS has a post with 27 points defending YAML as a configuration format. The piece from Posit's open source blog makes the case that despite all the criticism YAML gets, and there's plenty of it, it remains one of the better options for human-readable configuration, especially compared to alternatives like TOML or raw.json. LobStarS also highlighted the April update from Servo, the experimental browser engine written in Rust. The post, which earned 49 points, details new Android UI improvements, focus handling, forms support, and security fixes. Servo continues to be an important testbed for new web technologies and demonstrates that alternatives to the Chrome/Firefox duopoly are still being actively developed. GitHub Trending is showing some interesting activity. The News Research Hermes Agent project is gaining traction, along with something called Open Notebook from LF Novo. There's also a project called Taste Skill and Last 30 Days Skill that appear to be voice assistant integrations, though details are sparse in the trending list. Over on Hacker News, there's a project that caught attention with 240 points. Show HN, I derived a pancake. The absurdly optimized website features a scientifically derived pancake recipe where the creator approached pancake making like an engineering problem, optimizing for texture, flavor, and consistency. It's a fun example of applying rigorous methodology to everyday cooking. Teenage Engineering announced the APC-2, a professional record cutter for producing original playback discs. This got 209 points and 109 comments on Hacker News. It's a beautifully designed piece of hardware that lets you cut vinyl records at home, tapping into the resurgent interest in physical media and analog audio. On the infrastructure and home lab side, LobStarS featured a post on how much AMD 64 microarchitecture levels help in Go, with 16 points. The analysis from Daniel Lemare's blog examines performance differences between different x86-64 microarchitecture levels when running Go programs. The results show measurable but not dramatic improvements when targeting newer CPU instruction sets. There's also discussion on LobStarS about premature optimization sometimes being fun, with a post from Involk.com earning 6 points. The piece argues that while premature optimization is the root of all evil, is good general advice. Sometimes optimizing early in a project can be genuinely enjoyable and educational, even if it doesn't always pay off in production. A GitHub repository called GentalOS is getting attention on LobStarS with 6 points. It's a pair of hobby operating systems for vintage 32-bit and 16-bit PCs, demonstrating that OS development for retro hardware remains an active hobby. Hacker News also featured The Smallest Brain You Can Build, a perceptron in Python with 203 points. The tutorial from Ranpara.net walks through implementing a perceptron, the simplest possible neural network, from scratch in Python. It's an excellent educational resource for anyone trying to understand how neural networks actually work under the hood. For anyone working with Vision AI, there's a post on Hacker News with 57 points about playing with vision embeddings from PrestonJensen.com. The piece explores how to work with the vector representations that vision models produce, which is increasingly important as multimodal AI becomes more prevalent. There's also a detailed piece on Hacker News about algorithmic monocultures in hiring, with 99 points and 42 comments. The site algorithmichiring.github.io examines how, when everyone uses the same hiring algorithms and assessment tools, it can create homogeneous workforces and perpetuate biases at scale. Finally, on Hacker News, there's a tiny hackable CUDA language model implementation from Marcus Heimerl on GitHub that earned 31 points. It's a minimalist GPT implementation designed for learning and experimentation, perfect for anyone who wants to understand how transformer models work at the code level. Now for our security briefing. Let's walk through the latest additions to CISA's Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog, starting with CVE 2026-28318, added June 5th with a remediation deadline of June 19th. This is a SolarWinds SerView vulnerability, an uncontrolled resource consumption issue that allows specially crafted post requests using the content encoding header to cause problems. Organizations running SerView need to patch immediately, as this can be exploited to cause denial of service. CVE 2026-45247 was added June 3rd with a deadline of June 6th. That deadline has already passed, so this is urgent. This affects Murisvit full-page cache warmer and contains a deserialization of untrusted data vulnerability that allows unauthenticated attackers to achieve remote code execution. If you're running this Magento extension, you need to act immediately. CVE 2022-0492 was added June 2nd with a June 5th deadline, also already passed. This is a Linux kernel vulnerability involving improper authentication in the cgroup's v1 release agent feature, which could allow for privilege escalation. Given how widely Linux is deployed, this affects a huge number of systems. Check your kernel versions and patch as soon as possible. CVE 2025-48595, also added June 2nd with a June 5th deadline, affects Android framework. It's an integer overflow vulnerability that allows for code execution and local privilege escalation. Android device administrators need to ensure devices are updated to versions that patch this issue. CVE 2024-21182 was added June 1st with a June 4th deadline. This Oracle WebLogic Server vulnerability allows an unauthenticated attacker with network access via T3 or IIOP protocols to compromise Oracle WebLogic. WebLogic is widely used in enterprise environments, making this a significant concern. CVE 2026-0257 was added May 29th with a June 1st deadline. This is a Palo Alto Network's PAN-OS authentication bypass vulnerability that allows attackers to bypass security restrictions and establish unauthorized sessions. We'll have more on this from Palo Alto's own security advisories in a moment. CVE 2026-48027 was added May 27th with a June 10th deadline. This involves embedded malicious code in NX Console, a development tool. A compromised version of the extension was published, which could have allowed the malicious code to execute on developer machines. If you use NX Console, verify you're running a clean version. Similarly, CVE 2026-45321, also added May 27th with a June 10th deadline, affects Tanstack. Malicious versions were published to the NPM registry to steal credentials. This is part of a broader supply chain attack trend we're seeing in the JavaScript ecosystem. CVE 2026-8398 was added May 27th with a May 30th deadline, well past due now. This affects Daemon Tools Lite and has high impact on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The specifics aren't detailed in the CISA listing, but the severity classification suggests immediate action is required. Finally, CVE 2026-48172 was added May 26th with a May 29th deadline. This is a privilege escalation in the Lightspeed cPanel plugin that's exposed via the user-in cPanel plugin and can be abused by any cPanel user to gain elevated privileges. Now, from Palo Alto Network's own security advisories, we have CVE 2026-0258, a medium-severity server-side request forgery vulnerability in PAN-OS IKEV2 certificate URL fetching. This SSRF could allow an attacker to make the firewall fetch resources from unintended locations. While it's classified as medium severity, SSRF vulnerabilities can often be chained with other exploits for greater impact. Moving to other security news, Bleeping Computer reports that over 20,000 Instagram accounts were stolen in a Meta AI support hack. Attackers compromised what appeared to be Meta AI support channels and used them to phish credentials from Instagram users. This highlights the ongoing problem of impersonation attacks on social media platforms. Bleeping Computer also has coverage of a new botnet called C0XMO that spreads via a DDWRT router flaw and kills rival malware. This botnet exploits a vulnerability in DDWRT, the popular open-source router firmware, and once it compromises a device, it actively removes competing malware to maintain exclusive control. This turf war behavior among botnets is becoming more common. Finally, Bleeping Computer reports that a group called Silent Ransom is targeting law firms with fake IT support calls. The attackers impersonate legitimate tech support, convince firm employees to grant remote access, and then deploy ransomware. Law firms are attractive targets because they hold sensitive client data and are often under time pressure to restore access, making them more likely to pay ransoms. Time for our science and space segment. Unfortunately, the NASA astronomy picture of the day feed isn't providing details today, but I'll link to the current APOD in the show notes so you can check out what they're featuring. The big science story comes from science.org via Hacker News, which earned 179 points and 29 comments. Researchers have developed a new drug that functionally cures many hepatitis B virus infections. Hepatitis B is a major global health problem affecting millions of people, and while treatments exist to manage the virus, achieving a cure has been elusive. This new drug represents a significant breakthrough. It doesn't just suppress the virus but eliminates it in many patients, which is being called a functional cure. The implications for global health are enormous, particularly in regions where hepatitis B is endemic. Another fascinating scientific story from Hacker News, with 68 points, reports that Richard Scolyer has died. Scolyer was an Australian doctor behind a world-first brain tumor treatment who became famous for treating his own glioblastoma using an innovative immunotherapy approach. The BBC covered his passing, noting that he used himself as a test case for a treatment that had shown promise in melanoma. While his personal battle ultimately didn't succeed, his willingness to pioneer experimental treatment on himself advanced the field and provided valuable data for future research. On the more whimsical side of science, Hacker News featured a post about a spherical Voronoi diagram from Jason Davies with 15 points. Voronoi diagrams are mathematical constructs that divide space into regions based on distance to points, and creating them on a sphere rather than a flat plane presents interesting challenges with applications in geography, planetary science, and data visualization. There's also a historical piece that caught attention with 26 points on Hacker News about a giant floating Victorian dry dock. Master Mariners Australia tells the story of the world's largest floating dry dock being towed across the Atlantic to Bermuda in 1869. This was an incredible feat of 19th-century engineering, moving a massive iron structure across thousands of miles of ocean. It's a reminder that Victorian engineers were solving problems at scales we sometimes assume are modern achievements. Let's wrap up with a quick look at the markets before we close. Bloomberg reports that U.S. stocks halted their sell-off today, with rising oil prices lifting yields. The Middle East tensions are supporting crude prices, which helps energy stocks but creates headwinds for the broader market. European stocks dropped on the escalating situation between Israel and Iran, and gold extended its losses as the ceasefire appears increasingly fragile. Copper rebounded from Friday's slump despite the Gulf tensions, supported by Chinese buying and U.S. flows. Overall, markets are in a risk-off mood as investors watch the Middle East situation carefully, with commodities and defense-related stocks likely to see continued volatility. That wraps up today's edition of the Clovis Brief. Thank you so much for listening. Tomorrow we'll be tracking any developments in the Middle East situation, watching for more security vulnerabilities. CISA has been very active lately, and I'm particularly interested to see if there are any new AI research papers that build on that probabilistic reasoning work we discussed today. Stay informed, stay secure, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.